You are listening to Get Down to Business, and you could get on my website, shalomklein.com, to download podcasts from the past 6+ years of amazing conversations. And we try to be timely, we try to be relevant, and like many of our listeners, I've been following the news out of Lebanon, that deadly explosion in Beirut, very carefully. But fortunately, we've got some subject matter experts on the line with us. I am absolutely thrilled and honored to have with us on the air Rabbi Barry Axler, my dear, dear friend, and Todd Grainger joining us, who actually visited Lebanon not all that long ago. Welcome, Rabbi Barry, and welcome, Todd. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, Shalom.
Thank you.
It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. So, Barry, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, because actually you and I, we went on a journey together. We were in Iraq, and we were visiting Christians that in northern Iraq that have been persecuted from ISIS, persecuted in so many ways. And I know your Lebanon trip, which we're going to talk about in a moment, was sort of an extension of that because you care deeply about trying to make a difference on humanity. Barry, tell us some of your reflections.
Sure. In the Bible, it is mentioned what birds we shouldn't eat, okay? That we're prohibited from eating. And one of the birds mentioned is a stork. So why the stork? And the answer given is that the stork takes care of its own, which is very nice, but it doesn't take care of others. And I've built both my career and my life on reaching out to take care of others. I can't ask others to help the Jewish community, to stand with the Jewish community, if I'm not willing to stand with the other communities. I was at AIPAC about 3 years ago at their policy conference, and there was a very moving documentary that was done by the Klein group out of Jerusalem, and it focused on how the Christians are being persecuted in the Middle East. And while it touched on various countries, the main one it touched on was Iraq. And I came back and I was telling you about it because I was very moved. And you said you knew the perfect person. And through that, you and I got to experience that situation in Iraq firsthand and how the Christians were being persecuted. First by ISIS. They were decimated. They went from 5 million people down to 1.5 million. And then by the Kurds, or currently by the Kurdish government. And as a result of that trip, one of the other members of our group had a State Department connection, and he introduced me to her, and she said, I have a friend who's putting together a trip to Lebanon that I'd like you to meet, and it was Todd, and Todd and I met, and that's how it happened.
Amazing.
And actually, the Lebanon trip was even more serious and I think more dangerous than the Iraqi trip, because Lebanon is controlled by Hezbollah. They have about 7 million people, of which 1.5 million are Christians. But in addition to the 7 million, not counted, are about 2 million Syrian refugees and about 1 million Palestinian refugees. So now you're talking 10 million people, of which 1.5 are Christians, and they are really being persecuted.
Absolutely.
They don't get their fair share of the money, not even the own Lebanese government money, but even world money goes to the refugees. So they're in a very, very terrible situation.
Absolutely. And I'm chatting with my very dear friend, Rabbi Barry Axler, who again joined me on a really an incredible mission to Iraq, and we're talking about about Lebanon. Rabbi Barry, you went to Lebanon and saw the terrible situation, and that was terrible before this deadly blast. You went with Todd Grainger. We're going to talk to Todd in just a moment. But Barry, I know you went before this blast, but tell us again. I know you were just starting a little bit about what you saw on the ground.
Right. So first of all, there's tremendous corruption throughout Lebanon. Lebanon is very tribal in the sense, but the main tribe happens to be the Hezbollah, and they just control everything. In addition to having 100,000 rockets poised at Israel on the northern border, there is such corruption going on. The fair share of the money never gets down into the Christian community. There's levels of poverty and levels of suffering that it's just very hard to describe. They have, for example, they have no social security system. They have no pension system, and you have to leave your job at age 65. So you have engineers and college professors living under bridges and food. We saw some remarkable food banks and other services trying to help. But with the corruption and with strong arm of the Hezbollah government, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure anything can really be done to help save a country that was once a magnificent country. And then, of course, the blast. And there are many experts who believe that the Hezbollah was storing that material for years to use in bombs, to use in rockets against Israel. So the fact that it went off was not a surprise to many people. And I have to, on a positive note, I have to commend the Israeli government and the Israeli people, because even though they're at war with Lebanon, technically, they reached out and they said, we're ready to take in your victims of this and provide them with medical aid and with humanitarian aid. Buildings in Tel Aviv had the Lebanese flag on the building. So it was really a remarkable outpouring of trying to help a neighbor country, even though there is a state of war. And one only hopes that in the near future, that state of war will not be.
Barry, I cannot thank you enough for all that you have done to put yourself out there and see firsthand what's going on the ground. In a moment, we're going to squeeze in a quick break, and I'm going to chat with Todd Grainger. He'll tell us more about his perspective from Lebanon, and hopefully we could have a call to action about how people can, while the Lebanese government might be challenged, the people are not. We'll be right back, and we'll talk all about it. I'm rejoined on Get Down to Business by two heroes. Have just been chatting with Rabbi Barry Axler, who again joined me on a trip to Iraq and subsequently went to Lebanon. This was pre the Beirut blast and explosion that killed so many people. And Todd Grainger, the organizer of that trip to Lebanon, is continuing the conversation with me now. So Todd, we just heard from Rabbi Barry a little bit about his reflections, but tell us a little bit about some of the things you have seen time and again on the ground over there, and most importantly, what our listeners can do to help.
I appreciate it, Shalom. I'm a Middle East veteran of about 6 years of my business, and I traveled across the region on behest of my staff that said, you really need to know about the Middle East. And, I'm very impressed with you two visiting Iraq. It's a much different situation for Christians there who really are looking over their shoulder to maintain their heartbeat. But the significance of Lebanon is just so unique to not only Christianity, but the whole world is by its example of, religious coexistence, tolerance, and openness, and they're inclusive of diverse communities and cultures. This is the way the world is supposed to mature. And, that's been torn asunder. And this Christian population, once in the high 70s, is now, due to the influx of refugees and the focus on the Muslim populations, is falling under a third of the population. And it's really, instead of a health and safety issue, it's economic strangulation and persecution, and that's been the plan, and it's been ongoing. But this effort to help and prop up the Christian population and many of the diaspora in the United States, really doing hero work behind the scenes. But the latest events of COVID certainly didn't help, but the explosion just really the final nail in the coffin.
Absolutely. And Todd, is there hope, and what can we do about it?
Oh, well, the Maronite Christians there are extremely strong people, and they've fought in many civil wars, beating back Syrians to protect their land. These are tough people. They don't want to leave their country, and if you visited there, you'd understand why. It's just gorgeous, has significant religious experiences, mentioned in the Bible 150 plus times. But they will continue to fight, but they need help. And 1 in 10 before the blast that graduated from college can't find a job in Lebanon. As Barry mentioned, lack of a Social Security system is bad enough. The government's been promising and not delivering on a savings program that can take the place of having that safety net.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of sources to be able to support these things, but the people, the government is incapable of helping now in this situation, and it's dire. So there is debris that volunteers clean up in the streets that the government won't remove. They're sending assistances that is meant for those who've been directly impacted, losing their homes, that is now on their way to other neighborhoods far, far away from the blast in Muslim populations. There's been caravans. You would not believe trucks in the 20, 30 strong, large trucks carrying fuel and food up into Syria before the blast. This is typical.
Todd, I've got a hard stop at the bottom of the hour, so I want to thank you, Todd Grainger and Rabbi Barry Axler, for your incredible work spotlighting the plight, again, of the Christian population, both Iraq and then Lebanon. And our listeners, we will link to some of those resources, some of those aid on my website. Todd and Barry, thank you so much for joining me on the air.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. To success, let's get down to business. We'll talk to you next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on AM 560 The Answer.